The issue I chose to talk about was the atomic bombing of Japan. Now, the first article I chose was the United Nations Organization Weakens. What this article basically covers is that a lot of members of the board are just men of words and not actions. They don't really act on anything that they set and said that they would do. And the problem with it is that the men on board are still men of prejudice and racism who talk about ideologies and peace but practice others. Now, this will get back to more of the atomic bombing later on, as there was a lot of problems with it. There was racism involved and perhaps other motivations that weren't exactly to win the World War. The second article I chose was Truman Used the Atom Bomb to Halt the War, Stimson says. This article is here basically to justify the use of the atomic bomb. It's stating that the atomic bomb was more or less of an attack than it was to see the psychological effects, as it was important to show Japan what kind of power they had and that their whole country could be devastated. Scientists in the article quoted that they believed that it had to be done, and it was the only way for them to surrender to full extent, as the only way to make them surrender was to threaten their entire existence. Now, this article has a big bias towards the use, as it doesn't really talk about the negative effects of the use of the atomic bomb, the negative outlook it gave to other countries, to the United States, after the bombing, and it somewhat seems as if it's here just to sort of make Truman's decision look a little more viable than it might have been. The third article I chose was the atomic weapon. This article is basically covering the sheer power of the atomic bomb dropped, and sort of the side part of it where it was more of a race for survival and a race kind of laboratories to kind of beat the Soviet Union to understanding uranium first. Another big facet of this article is talking about really how, although they thought the atomic bomb would have brought them victory, they never really thought about the seeds of hate that would be planted and what other countries would think of them and how the world would look upon the United States after this action. The third article I chose was Charter Becomes Law of Nations. Now, this kind of ties back into the first article where they believed that the United Nations was weakening. So the only way to secure the United Nations was to have members and countries to sign a protocol that said that they understood that peace also depended on the people rather than just the documents, and they must first think of the people before they do their own actions. And for the charter to be effective, they needed at least 29 of the 51 countries to deposit ratifications. The fifth article I chose was Kaden was atom bomb dropped on Japan because she is a colored race. Now, this article is basically discussing whether or not some influences of the atomic bombing had to do with some racism, that they were not a non-white nation. And the article is basically saying that there's no evidence to prove these theories. And although it does state that, there are some bias, as there was some racism, as you can see in the propaganda in this slide. They depicted Japanese people as very, very gross and scary and with an accent, and making it seem like they're just evil and kind of just more steering people towards supporting the use of the atomic bomb rather than understanding that they're both sides to the war. And the article I chose from today that sort of covers these issues that were present back then was the anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, revives debate over the atomic bomb. So this covers basically how Harry Truman tried to defend his decision to drop the atomic bomb, how he said it was the only way to avoid a full-scale invasion and save lives, and even though it did save American soldiers, the casualties were tremendous. Just in the Hiroshima bombing alone, 200,000 people died, and over 90% of those people were civilians. A lot of people still to this day contend that the Japanese were sending signals that they were ready to surrender, and the United States either ignored them or didn't hear them. And since they had found this new technology, they were ready to show it and kind of show their superiority over the Soviet Union and the power that it had discovered. And there are a lot of people, who think it was a good idea, and a lot of people think it was a bad idea. And it's always been up to debate since its time. And it's very hard to understand, but I don't believe that it was a good idea to sacrifice the lives of so many civilians when Japan supposedly was on the brink of defeat. And here's my works cited.